Hello, hello, hello. I am just having so much fun. This is show 3 since my very short maternity leave, and I couldn't be more thrilled. But welcome, first of all, before I tell you about our first guest, welcome everybody that's watching. I so appreciate your time. It's midday here at the Pacific Northwest and 1 p.m. to be exact. And you might be playing hooky with work, and I won't tell anyone if you don't. But yes, welcome to Voxsana, the podcast, the very official podcast where we talk about all things voice. And I always say I'm so excited for episodes that we do, but I'm really, really excited for this one. The idea of having my friend Tanya Creed come on came to me after seeing that Leanne Rhymes had learned sign language for her entire album. And I went, oh, voice in another way, voice in another way. And sometimes we don't think about all the dimensions of voice until it's right there in our face. But I am so thrilled. This is so very cool. And my friend Tanya Creed. So let me read you her bio and then we'll bring Tanya on. She's beautiful. P.S. She just is. So Tanya Creed is a registered sign language interpreter with 24 years interpreting experience in a variety of sectors: post-secondary, medical, mental health, community, and video relay services. Tanya enjoys the challenge of facilitating communication between deaf and hearing individuals and continually strives to use her voice to bridge the gap between deaf and hearing worlds. In both her professional and personal life, Tanya aspires to continually learn, to grow, and to laugh as much as possible. Tanya is raising her 2 teenage, beautiful daughters in Victoria, BC, with her beautiful husband of 20 years. Between work and home, there is never a dull moment in Tan's life. She's awesome. I'm kissing butt here, Tan. Come on in. Come on in. I love you.
You're making me blush.
But you're beautiful. Your family's beautiful. Like, what can I say? I adore you. So, thank
Feelings
you for
mutual.
thank you, and thank you for being on the show. So where I want to go first is when I sent the invite to you to be on the show. I wanna know what your thoughts were. Was it obvious to you that you would come on a show about voice, or did it take a second to go right? Let's just dive in.
It definitely took a second. I actually responded with, I think you sent this to the wrong person. I honestly didn't know how this would come together. And
Yeah,
then when you said, no, really, I want you, it's been amazing, a journey for me to really think about voice in that perspective and my profession and the
yeah.
impact of as an interpreter using voice. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and you used, two types of voice because your hands are your voice, but your beautiful, like, butter voice is your voice as well in the sessions, some of the sessions that you do, so, that's really cool. Has this got you thinking about your speaking voice any differently, or have you always had an awareness around how important it is in the work that you do?
That's a good question. I think
Mm,
it's more recent, um,
yeah.
the importance of voice for me and my journey in my
Mhm,
profession, but also in my personal life. I
mhm,
think it kind of stems more from, say, over the last few years, a lot of um, introspective of figuring out, like my own privileges. Like I'm thinking like
mhm,
Black Lives Matters movement and
mhm.
reconciliation and different movements and kind of figuring out right my voice and the impact our voice has. So that's
Mhm.
more recently I would think that I've started to realize um, just the impact of voice in
A
yeah
voice.
both
Yeah.
professional and personal life.
I know. It spills into everywhere, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When we start working on one area of our life, it goes everywhere. And I find that with voice, a lot of times with the singers I work with, they're all of a sudden feeling more confident and courageous to say the things they couldn't say in their lives. So it's not just restricted to singing, it goes all through little trickles, which is so exciting, right? Self expression in any form is so exciting because we all just want to be seen and heard. As I'm learning from my toddler son, Like, we all just
Absolutely.
want that, right? There's so many juicy directions we could go to, Tan, in just what you've been saying, but I wonder if we can just, unpack the myth of what maybe not myth, but share with folks about what it is to be an interpreter, and, I know that's a big one, and you sent me a really cool blurb in a text message the other day, and, if do you have that on hand to read it? Or I do, but if you do, I'd love to hear it in your words.
Do you know what? I'd love to hear you would.
Oh.
You would.
Yeah. I'm throwing you to the wolves.
Let's all
Isn't that
get
nice?
prepared. Oh, here we go.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this was the best description I've ever come across
Yeah,
of what interpreters do. And honestly, when I read it, I think, how the heck do we do this? So this is the process of interpreting summarized. While you speak, interpreters are actively listening to what you say, understanding what they hear, breaking it down into parts, finding the main idea and important details. Then they will convert it into a totally different language. So for me, American Sign Language,
yeah.
restructure the message so it makes sense in the new language, put it out in sign language, and then monitor what they are saying to make sure it is making sense, all the while keeping the integrity of the original message and continuing to listen to what you are saying as the process repeats over and over and over again.
Wow.
Exhausted just reading that.
Wow, and sometimes for hours on end, right? Like,
Yeah,
depending on the event. I know I've seen, interpreters at concerts, Jessie J concert, I'll never forget, there was an interpreter standing on stage while she was performing and dancing and singing, and it was like, "This is so cool." But that's 2 hours of on,
of
right?
that process. The whole, like,
Wow. And then what happens if, this is maybe a side note, but what happens if you can't quite understand the person that you are interpreting? Like, maybe, for an example, the concert example where maybe she's muffling her words a bit because she's out of breath because she's doing some dance moves. Is there what happens in those moments? Just go with it?
in that situation, yes, you'd have to just go
Yeah.
with it because
Yeah.
there's not an opportunity to say, for the interpretation,
Yeah.
can you go back, or what was that word again?
Yeah.
Whereas in other settings, it's critical that you get
Mhm.
clarification. There's a lot
Mhm.
of for the interpreter, or one moment for the interpreting process, just trying to get clarification. So
Mhm.
yeah, there's a lot because you have to know what the source language is to interpret into another language.
Mhm.
So you have to know the
Mhm.
meaning of the source.
Right, right. So in that respect, that interpreter could have listened to some of the songs ahead of time and or got the set list, maybe if they were lucky, and figured it out beforehand if they had time. But sometimes, like you said, winging it, winging it. So I get it. I get it.
Absolutely.
Um, I want to go into your story first to kick it off about how you fell into this beautiful line of work because I think it's really cool. It's a really amazing thing to be doing with your life and dedicating your life to. And I wonder if you can speak to that first, Tanya, and then we're going to go in so many awesome directions. So
Ooh,
go for it. How did you
okay.
find this as a career?
How did I find this? It's such a, most people
I
do
know.
ask me that because it is such a unique profession.
Yeah.
In my high school, there was way back when there was an interpreter, and I didn't meet that interpreter then, but there was a deaf student. And of all people, my basketball coach in grade 12 said, Tanya, I think you'd be a really good sign language interpreter.
What made
Don't
her
know.
say that? Or him here? What
I,
made them say that?
I still don't know. They just said, I think
Hmm.
you'd be really good at that. And so I kind of filed that away. I went to UVic and I was going to become a teacher. A
Mhm.
teacher or a speech pathologist was my goal.
Oh,
And
cool.
then when I was, first year UVic, I decided, my sister and I both started taking, we decided to take American Sign Language classes. At that time, they were only offered in Duncan. So we drove to and from Duncan twice a week. And that was great because I was with my sister.
Yeah.
And with a deaf instructor, it's critical that you learn American Sign Language from a deaf instructor. We might dive into that in a bit.
Yes, I'm gonna say let's pinpoint that for right after
Hold
this.
that.
Let's
That's a
talk
little
about
sign.
that.
Um,
Yes.
and When taking the night classes for starting American Sign Language, I felt like it was the first thing that I really felt like I was good at. I
Mm,
can remember that feeling of going, wow, like this really clicks for me.
mm.
And I had an amazing first deaf instructor who was so supportive and said, you can become an interpreter. But to become an interpreter, you need
Mhm,
to have American Sign Language first. So you have to
mhm,
have a certain level of fluency in the
mhm.
language. Um, you don't have to be completely fluent, but you have to have a certain level. And so for me to move on at that time to the second level of American Sign Language, it was only offered in Nanaimo. It wasn't offered in Victoria anymore. And
Mm.
so still going to UVic, wanting to continue with American Sign Language. And so my wonderful dad offered to drive me to and from Nanaimo twice a
Oh,
week because
wow.
it was at night. He didn't want me to drive alone. Of course, it was
Yeah.
January to
Of
March,
Oh, yeah.
and I had to be at UVic in the morning, and he's just like, "I'll drive you."
Oh,
So
wow.
he drove me
Wow.
so I could go to that next level of American Sign Language. And then I went
Awesome.
to Vancouver Community College. They have a deaf studies program there. So
Mhm.
it's all deaf instructors and maybe one hearing instructor that teaches the interpreting process.
Yeah.
But you're immersed. It's like full days, or it was back then, of immersed in deaf language, deaf culture, American Sign Language, deaf culture. Uh,
Mhm.
and then I decided to go to Edmonton for it was called back then the interpreter training program.
Yeah.
And yeah, so then that was a full immersion of just the interpreting process, which
Wow.
there's no aptitude test to know if you have the skill
Right.
set or not. And so it's so many people go all the way through and then don't graduate because it just doesn't click. And for some reason it clicks for some and it
Oh,
doesn't for others. So it's was such a journey to get
wow.
to the point of becoming an interpreter.
Mhm.
But I always said to myself throughout that whole process, even if I don't interpret, um, the gift of being immersed in a different culture, a different language,
Mhm.
just was just amazing, even if I didn't pursue the profession. But luckily,
Mhm.
it's worked out.
So when you look back at your childhood, does it make sense that you ended up in a career like this? We often
Mm.
see that something like for me, I watched The Little Mermaid at 7 and was like, "Ooh, ooh, okay, I like singing. I didn't want to be a fish. I want I wanted to be a let's just be clear,
Yeah.
or swim. But I certainly wanted to sing the song over and over and over on the playground. So when you look back at your childhood, 10, can you pinpoint like, oh, I really liked, doing this and doing this,
Mm.
and the combo of that makes so much sense with what I'm doing now.
Not really.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, the only thing that I can think of is that growing up, like my mom's hard of hearing, so she's deaf in one ear. She doesn't use sign language.
Okay.
Um, but just noticing her, at times, like she does very well
Yeah.
with being hard of hearing, but struggling a bit. Like at times when we were out and she wouldn't hear people, or she would be not looking at somebody, and somebody would talk to her and
Hmm.
think she was being rude. Um,
Mm.
so I remember that impact. So maybe that, yeah, has
Totally.
a little bit on
Totally.
me. And
Yeah.
then my dad became hard of hearing, lost his hearing in one ear, oh gosh, like 30 years ago now. So
Okay.
growing up, both
Yeah.
parents had some hearing loss.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that had an impact. I've never delved into that, to tell you the
Yeah, that's
truth.
cool. That's cool. Some fodder for later, introspection
Yeah,
for the fall, right?
yeah,
My goodness.
totally.
Well, it makes sense for me because you have a beautiful speaking voice, and I know that that makes you uncomfortable when I say that, but I'm gonna say it because it's obviously true because and anybody else that's watching will agree. And I wonder if you having your mom's being around your mom made you speak a little bit more clearly, a little bit more
Mm.
breath support, and all this kind of cool stuff that's happening in your voice. um, any insight into that? Have you worked on your voice or is it just naturally awesome?
Oh, see, I'm blushing again.
I know.
Um,
I knew you would.
why? No, never done any voice work.
Okay.
The component of interpreting, so when I'm using my voice, so when there's a deaf person signing and I'm voicing what they're saying,
Mhm.
that process of interpreting, I absolutely love. I mean, I love
Mm.
both processes, but I love when I can figure out a way, like, because you have to interpret with the intent of whoever is signing or speaking.
Mhm.
So if somebody's really animated and telling a story, I love the getting right in there and having your voice really represent everything that this person is putting out there and
Mhm.
expressing. I know that
Mhm.
doesn't answer your question, but I'm
No,
just
it
thinking that
does.
there's something about that that really,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just amazing.
Can you walk our viewers through the process of what it is this video relay service is? What I think you're speaking about, where you're speaking with one person, you're the middle person, and then you're translating it to the other person, and then the other way.
Right.
Can you just talk a little bit about that? What it's like? Is it like juggling balls in the air, or is it very we stop and we talk to one, however it looks? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of both.
Hmm.
So that's called video relay services, video relay interpreting, and it's relatively new.
Hmm.
So it's fabulous because now the Canadian deaf community has access to how you or I would phone our bank. They
Mm.
couldn't do that before. There wasn't access, wasn't the technology to do it in their own language.
Hmm.
So what it is my headset, everything's just like this right here. My work,
Yeah.
I set up from home. That I'll have the deaf person on my screen and the hearing person in my ear,
Oh
and
wow. Yeah.
it's pretty much so. For example, if it's a deaf initiated call, a deaf person would pop up. I have no prep. I have no idea
Right.
who they're calling, what they're doing. So it's like
Wow.
you're on, and you have to, with interpreting, the biggest thing is trust. So there's a, like, this deaf person is entrusting me to be their voice.
Hmm.
So, so it's, I love the challenge of trying to connect right away with someone, try to
Yeah.
build trust. It's just a smile, like, hey, kind of like, I got you. Just trying to do
Hmm.
whatever I can to help them know that I'm here, let's do this.
Hmm.
And so then we place the call, the hearing person would pick up. I explain through an interpreter. So the deaf person might say, yeah, I'm calling for a job interview. I got an
Wow.
email that said
Wow.
I need to, I can book an interview. And so the potential employer might say, great, do you have time now? So I have no background knowledge of this person, and they're going to have
Wow.
a job interview. So again,
Amazing.
it's the juggling, it's everything. It's like,
That's a special skill because I imagine there's some difficult conversations that come through you. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So in whatever realm, not through just the video relay interpreting, even in person, if
Mhm.
it's a counseling session or a doctor's appointment, it's we talk a
Yeah.
lot about in the interpreting field, like many other fields, about vicarious trauma, and
Mhm.
you're the conduit
Ooh,
for the message,
yeah.
and but it's still going through you, even though it's not directly happening to you. So there's that a lot of self care when it comes to very
Mhm.
challenging situations that you find yourself in.
Yeah. I love that we're talking about this point because this might be something that folks aren't thinking about. It seems really cool to learn a second language, and in this case, ASL, and use it in life. But as an interpreter, there might be some areas where it's difficult emotionally, and
Yeah.
how to that's a whole other skill. And I imagine they teach you something about that in the studies that you took about how to not take it on as yours and get too emotionally caught up in it and not to be able to translate the message, right? Like that is skilled work. That is skilled work. Never mind
Yes.
going with the flow. Like I'm not good at that. I'm working on that. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, rewarding work though, I imagine. Like very, yeah,
Absolutely. I
yeah,
love to segue there because with the vicarious trauma that we can experience as interpreters,
yeah.
this is not a coined term, but by a co-interpreter of mine, we were working together recently, and she came up with, we were trying to figure out the right term. So you can have vicarious trauma, but the flip side is we called it vicarious euphoria. So,
Oh,
right, we don't know the right word yet, but that's what she came up with. I'm
yes,
like, that's it for right now.
yes.
But it's those moments that, for example, so say it's a hearing person that's presenting and I'm
Mhm.
on stage and I'm signing to there's deaf members in the audience, and or it could be vice versa. It could be a deaf
Yeah.
person telling their story, whomever is telling their story, and I'm interpreting it either way.
Mhm.
But the euphoria of in that moment, and it's like an empowering story, it's whatever it is, and it's that feeling of gratitude of being the conduit for this person's story. Like it's just such an honor.
Wow.
So again, the euphoria, like you just have these moments like that was so empowering, and I got to be the vessel for that, to get that message
Right?
across, and then to be privy to
Yeah.
situations that I don't know in what other profession I would have this from literally day to day, different experiences, to be
Wow.
privy to different things that I wouldn't normally be a part of.
Yeah, and a monumental figure in a lot of families' lives because they're hearing your voice or seeing you, and
Right.
in these, like, I imagine there's some happy times that you deal with, like, "Hey, we're having a baby." So, things like
Yeah.
that where it's super cool that you have this amazing role connecting the dots for folks in those moments as well, not just the hard moments, but the euphoric
The
moments.
euphoric. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. And it's
awesome.
also it's interesting. There's so many layers to interpreting, but the other
Mhm,
aspect of that is, as I said, we have to build the trust, but
mhm.
then pretty much not that I have to be invisible, but to me, the perfect interpretation is where there's, say, a hearing and a deaf person, and they don't even know that I'm there. It's just
Oh,
seamless, right? So it's
yeah,
it's they're connecting on
yeah,
the purest level, even
yeah.
though it's going through me. So I always
Wow.
like, you want to just kind of not that ignore the interpreter. Like it's just like I always want to make sure those two have eye contact. I'm behind the hearing person,
Yeah,
say, so
yeah.
they're looking at the deaf person.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
We are talking with Tanya Creed, who is a registered sign language interpreter. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to pop them in the chat or you can just watch. That's cool. That's cool too. No pressure. Tan, there's so many directions I want to go. And I'm going to keep saying that because it's such a juicy conversation. But one of them I want to really circle back to is what we just mentioned earlier that we put a pin in. And it's the importance of learning ASL from a deaf instructor. Can you talk about that and why that is so important?
Absolutely. What a lot of people don't realize is that um, there's a deaf culture. And
Mhm.
so deaf people can identify in different ways, maybe as a deaf person, hard of hearing, deaf blind. There's lots of different identities within the deaf community and deaf
Mhm.
culture. But there's people that identify as capital D deaf. So
Okay.
that means you are a member of the deaf community, you use American Sign Language, you follow all the traditions, norms, values that a culture has
Mhm.
within this deaf culture. So, as I said during my schooling, that's what I was fortunate enough to be taught by
Mhm.
capital D deaf people who taught me their language and their culture.
Mhm.
And so, having said that, it's almost like I love the parallels of Indigenous culture.
Yeah.
So, if you wanted to learn an Indigenous language, you wouldn't go to a non Indigenous person that knows the language. They might be fluent, but you're not going to go
Mhm.
to them, you're not going to ask them for the cultural knowledge of a culture that they're not a core member of.
Yes.
So, myself as a hearing person, I'm not a core member of the deaf community, the deaf culture.
Mhm.
I'm an ally. I know the language. I've been told, and this is the most compliment, I've been told by a deaf person that I have a deaf heart. That means I have
Oh, wow.
deafness, the best intent in my profession.
Yeah.
Um, and so you always want to learn a language and a culture by a member of that culture.
Mhm.
So that's why it's critical that
Mhm.
you learn sign language from a deaf individual.
Oh, I love that. An ally of the culture. That is a super cool way to look at it, and something that I didn't even think about. So, I imagine as someone who works in an ASL in the deaf community, you are very much an ally of that. That people ask you about deaf culture and
Right.
to comment on deaf culture. And what is your response to that? I thought it was beautiful when we talked the other day.
I'm trying to remember what my beautiful response was
So
the
for
other
example,
day.
if I said, "Oh, Coda is a really great movie. How accurate is it about a child of deaf adults? How accurate is it? And it won an Oscar. And what do you think?" And that would be an
Yes.
example.
Yeah, muted myself. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Got a little excited there. Yeah, just again that again, it's not my language, it is not my culture, so I
Yeah,
can't comment
yeah,
um, on that. So what I love to tell people though is if there's a deaf person in the room at the time and a hearing person comes up and says, "What did you think of the movie Coda?" I'm just like, "Oh, hang on, great opportunity. Let's bridge that gap. Let's go
mhm,
to that deaf person and come on, I'll interpret for you. They want to know what you thought of
yeah,
the movie Coda." So then
yeah,
it's them, right? So
yeah,
so as an interpreter with the movie Coda or any movie that has involves deafness, um, critical to have deaf actors, deaf people representing.
yeah,
So that just in regards to that movie. Was
yeah,
there anything
absolutely.
else that I said that was a better response that you want to
Yeah. You're
nudge
so
me
cute.
about?
You're so cute. No, let me see because I have some notes. No, in my mind, I likened it to, when musicians get asked about movies about music that star actors that aren't musicians, right? And you're just like, "Okay, well, yeah." Or for me, to put a better example, if someone asked me, a musician, about how accurate whiplash is for drummers. Well, I'm
Right.
not a drummer. I work around drummers, and I can speak their language to a point, but I am not a drummer, so I cannot tell you how accurate it is. And I don't know if that's a good example or not, but that's kind of what came to my mind where we have to be sensitive about who can speak to what, the accuracy of something. I can ask you if you liked it, and you could say, "Sure, yeah, it was good."
Yeah.
But I really appreciated your take on deaf culture and your role within the culture, around the culture, and how that works. I thought that was brilliantly and mind blowing too, because I hadn't thought of it that way. But you're right. If we're learning another language, we would want to go to a native speaker of that language to learn everything we can about that language. So brilliant, brilliant,
And
brilliant.
just to add to that, just with the analogy of whiplash or
Yeah,
music, the
yeah.
added layer when it comes to asking about deaf culture to somebody that's hearing, even though
Mhm,
I'm an interpreter and I know the language and I know the culture,
mhm,
the added layer is being a part of a minority, of an oppressed
mm,
group who have
mm.
tons of barriers.
Yeah,
So so that's another, that's because then I, as a hearing person, I'm just adding to that suppression of
right.
the deaf voice
Yeah,
in that regard because I'm speaking for a culture that I don't belong to.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it comes to trying to break down barriers and to yeah, let people know that there's sadly the history of deaf people. There's been tons of oppression. It's
yeah,
So it just takes it to a different level once you're in the know-how of the language and the culture.
yeah.
Whoa, that's not my role. It's not
And
my
yeah,
space.
I love that you're speaking about this because it's not something that I would have thought about in terms of what I see all over, splashed all over media is not this conversation. It's
Right.
maybe one that's in the background or further down the page. So I love that we're talking about, no, we have a beautiful culture that needs to be recognized and needs to be able to the accessibility. So let's dive into
Yeah.
that because I understand from our conversation yesterday, which I wish we were recording, it was equally awesome. Every conversation with you is awesome, but
Oh,
this one was equally awesome. The accessibility is changing for these folks, and we're our world is understanding that we need to do more. Can you talk a little bit about that journey and what you're seeing, the changes? Maybe it's BC related, but that can help people understand how it's changing. Yeah.
absolutely. I think a great jumping off point with that is uh, our provincial COVID announcements
Mm,
that started, what year was that again? Feels like moons ago. But so when Dr. Henry's first and Adrian Dick started their first announcements, and luckily they had Nigel, the deaf interpreter. So
Yeah.
if you were watching the BC announcements for COVID, there was a deaf interpreter, or he wasn't the only one. There were other deaf interpreters throughout. But
Yeah.
um, so accessibility, it needs to. So previous to that, news, nothing. Deaf people didn't have that accessible. So you think there's
Mhm.
an emergency, and there was
Right.
no, it wasn't set up that you would have a sign language interpreter, or let alone a deaf interpreter,
Right.
making those announcements accessible. And the
Yeah.
reason why it needs to be a deaf interpreter is
Yeah.
that's their native language. They
Yes.
are have all the savviness of that language to get it the
Mhm.
clearest message across. So, especially in those emergency situations, and hopefully
Mhm.
in every situation from here on in, you need to
Mhm.
have it represented by a deaf individual, a deaf interpreter.
Mhm.
Um, so, in the broader, so that I could take a tangent with that, but I'll stick
I
with
know you could.
accessibility as a
It's cool. It's cool.
just okay. um, so luckily in BC, there was new legislation passed about the I'm going to get the name of it wrong, but equity and accessibility, and
Mhm.
in that act, it ASL is recognized as a language that you need to have ASL interpretation at, like for BC government and different things. It's just needs to be more accessible
Mhm.
for deaf people.
Mhm.
In that legislation, it has people of wheelchair accessibility and different things, but ASL is a part of that. So it's fabulous. Now there seems to be way more awareness about having
Mhm.
interpreters um, at events, say like City of
Yes.
Victoria is amazing. They'll have a town hall meeting, regardless if a deaf person says in advance, I want an interpreter. City Hall or City of Victoria will make sure there's an interpreter there.
It's
And it's
awesome.
absolutely right. You and I, as hearing people, we can decide last minute to go to a town hall meeting at five
Yeah.
o'clock. We don't
Yep.
need to pre plan our lives. We don't need, whereas a deaf person would have. They would have
Yes.
had to plan 3 weeks before, let the city know
Wow.
I need an interpreter. Now there needs to, we're low on interpreters on the island.
Yeah.
So they would have to scramble to find an interpreter. Whereas
Right.
equal accessibility is that deaf individual has every right as us at
Mhm.
5 o'clock at night to go to a 6 o'clock town hall meeting and know that
Yes.
it's like a wheelchair ramp. They know that
Yeah.
the interpreter is going to be there. There's no
Yeah.
barriers.
Yeah. So that's a myth that I wanna bust through is that because of our experience my experience with deaf culture has only been around it in school-aged situations, and
Hmm.
one of the misconceptions that you can think of is that, every deaf person might have their own interpreter. That is
Right,
wrong. That is
right,
wrong, but
right.
you may come out of elementary school thinking that way and that you wouldn't be aware of the challenges that come forward in adulthood, for example, when there is no interpreter at the town hall meeting, right? One other myth I want to bust through is, and I know people will possibly be thinking about this, is closed captioning
Hmm.
and ASL not the same, not two different languages, would you say? How does that work in the deaf culture as an ally? I know you're speaking from that point, but, if someone was to say, "Well, we have, closed captioning," is that not good? Does that not work? How would we be looking at having a small screen in the bottom with someone interpreting? Is that better? Is that different? What would you say to that conversation?
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation
Yeah.
because it depends on the individual and how
Mhm.
what that's either deaf or hard of hearing or deaf
Mhm.
blind, what they're how what they need for accessibility.
Right.
So there's not one just, oh, we have closed captioning, that's good enough, or we have an interpreter, that's good enough,
Got it.
because it could be a hard of hearing person that comes in and says, no, I need the captioning, I don't know American Sign Language. Or it could be the deaf
Ah.
person that comes in that says, American Sign Language is my native language. As you can imagine, if you can't hear English and you're
Yes.
born deaf,
Yes.
learning to read and write English not just is, can be extremely challenging.
Yes.
So that might be a barrier. Written English could be a barrier for them because their native
Right.
language is American Sign Language.
Yeah.
It's so unique in that it's not they're not through exposure. You don't just easily pick up English
Yes.
when you're
Yeah.
deaf or hard of hearing. Um, so it's Depends on the
Yeah.
individuals. So at these events that I'm saying now that they're making them accessible, most of the time they have a captionist and they have an interpreter.
Wow. Wow. I love this because this is voice of another dimension, of another color, because ASL is someone's dominant voice. You know,
Right.
they don't know how to read and write English. They don't, closed caption doesn't work for them. And someone like me, who I admit I'm ignorant to this conversation. I don't know what I don't know. So to be able to ask someone like you, what don't I know, and how can I think about this differently and more open heartedly? This is awesome. This is so awesome. So I appreciate you answering all my questions, even though they might be obvious to someone that works in the field. They
That's
might not be. I don't know.
it's
I
all
don't know.
good.
We're
Yeah, it's
gonna
great.
we're gonna roll with it. But there's so much. So where do you see the accessibility going, Tan? And I know this is your own personal opinion. So are we going to see ASL interpreter in the corner window on SNL one day, right? Like Saturday Night Live, and we've got someone interpreting in the bottom corner. Like, where do you think it's going?
I sure the heck hope so. Um,
Awesome.
I think absolutely. And I, getting back to when I was talking about having deaf interpreters, that's a
Yeah.
concept that a lot of people are like, what? How does
Yes.
that work?
Yeah.
Um, and so maybe I'll just dive into that for a little
Yes,
bit.
please. Yep. Yep.
Um, so ideally, a deaf person, again, as I said, that it's their native language, that they would be the face of the news, broadcast or whatever realm, that would be
Mhm.
a deaf interpreter. And then myself as a hearing interpreter, I would act as the co-interpreter. So if it was a news broadcast, I would be kind of sitting in the front row if it's live, say, and the deaf interpreter would be there. Say it's Dr. Henry
Mhm.
speaking and making the announcement. I would be interpreting what the hearing people are saying in the room. So the
Mhm.
deaf interpreter then puts it out in this beautiful American Sign Language. So
Wow.
my goal, or my not my goal, because I'm not going to
Vision.
achieve this on my own. My
Yeah.
vision
Yeah.
is that absolutely that everything would be accessible. So you'd, for example, for everyone, but mostly for kids that are
Yeah.
deaf or hard of hearing,
Oh,
that they could
yeah.
turn on a TV show. Be ideal if it was more, if it was in sign language, if there was more characters, and
Yeah.
us hearing people had to rely on the captioning. That would be dreamy.
Wow, that's
Little
so cool.
reverse.
Yes, why not?
Um, but
Yep.
just for people to see themselves, they need people, you need to see yourself to feel good, to know what you can, where you can go in this world.
Yeah.
So ideally to have deaf individuals, deaf interpreters on TV programming or whatever it is, that it's just more accessible.
Yeah. Oh, I love so much about this. You have a very open-hearted approach to this work, and I asked you yesterday, is this a Tanya thing or a culture, an interpreter culture thing? And you said a bit of both. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Oh, sure. Um, yeah, this is, and all of my colleagues that I admire and respect, I think we're all of like mind, and that
Mhm.
it's that this is the approach. It's you want to lead with love. That's what I just
Yes.
thought of that recently. That or just
Love
been
that.
more open, just in every
Yep.
interaction.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm just trying to think of like so when I
Yep.
work with this is a little bit of a tangent. So, but when I work with a deaf individual, say somebody
Mhm.
just pops on my screen,
Mhm.
and when it's the video relay interpreting, and
Yes.
I'll think in my mind, this could be my mom phoning the bank. This could be, or it's,
Yeah.
a tricky situation. And I'm like, how would, you just try to make it like you just want the best. You want to have a successful transaction. What's this all about? And help
Mhm.
the two people get to what they need
Mhm.
to go to. So that is not answering your question.
It is though. It is. It is. It is because that empathy is number 1. That, in this field, especially, being the conduit of a conversation that might be very difficult. It might be sharing doctor's results with a family member, um, without empathy. And I understand you have to kind of have a good balance of self-care around that empathy, because you could be crushed by what you're just witnessing. But that empathy is crucial, I imagine. It just is. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so is integrity in our work. So,
Mm.
for example,
Mhm.
um, I had been doing an assignment, an ongoing assignment, and I realized that I wasn't the best fit for this group of people. And so it's a
Ah.
matter of, letting for that was going through a different agency where I was booked through them, of just saying,
Mhm.
you know what, there's must be somebody better for
Yeah.
this job. Um,
Yeah.
for whatever reason that I need to step back and you
Mm.
just there's a better fit. And I, as interpreters,
Mhm.
it's we do a lot of we call it co-interpreting. So where we're working together, like if
Oh, yeah.
there's an yes, so if something is generally an hour and a half or longer, then
Mhm.
we'll have two interpreters. And that's a situation where we're there. So, say I take a 20-minute chunk, so I'm busy interpreting. My co interpreter is making sure I'm catching everything, giving me the head nod,
Oh,
or like,
smart.
or
Yeah.
giving me the feed. So, it's all about
Mhm.
the interpreting process and what's the best way we're going to achieve the goals of this interaction. It's not about
Mhm.
me not doing a good job
Mhm.
in the way of I got my teamer there. So my teamer would be like giving feeds, oh, I missed that. Or I might just say, I'm not getting this. So let's switch.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And
That's
it's
awesome.
totally, it's such a supportive environment.
Mhm.
And it has also with that the idea of, and this is relatively new in our profession, and I'm loving this
Mhm.
concept of it's the interpretation. So if there's a
Mhm.
mistake that say I voice something incorrectly, I'll say, one moment for the interpretation. We're trying to avoid, as interpreters, saying, sorry, the interpreter made a mistake. Sorry.
Ah.
Let's put it out here. It's very visual, right? Let's put it out here. It's the interpretation. So everything about this
Yeah.
process, and then it's easier when you see it clearer. Then you go, oh, for the interpreter, or the interpreter needs to clarify this point instead of I made a
Ah.
mistake. We just
Ah.
need to backtrack for a second. Let's
Yeah.
just put it out here. And then that personally helps me from feeling, oh no, I'm not good enough. I did this. And because
Mhm.
it's just a vicious cycle if you have that mindset. So
Ah.
I think that's in any
Yeah.
profession though. Take it
Perfection
outside of
kills.
yourself. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, perfection is not welcome in any sort of,
No.
wow, we have a chat. Can you believe
Yay.
it? Yay. So we have, hi, first time viewer here. You ladies are awesome. Oh,
Oh,
thanks, Strom Geek
thanks.
TV. Tanya, do you foresee a future APP that app? I'm assuming that means. Let me just review review that. A future app. This is why you read things silently in your head first. App that could be developed to bridge communication for hearing and non-hearing. Oh, right. Yeah. Great question.
Yeah, technology is amazing. And you know what? I'm sorry, I haven't done my research, but there are
Yeah.
apps right now. A
Yeah.
lot of my deaf friends really enjoy, like when they're out and it's just with hearing people, whatever interaction it is, the uh, text. Text to voice app, or where so the hearing person would talk and their phone would pick it up and the deaf person
Mhm.
can read it.
Mm.
um, what's challenging is I know different companies have tried to develop avatars that actually sign,
Oh,
but then
wow.
I mean, the technology, they're getting there, but a lot of
Yes.
my deaf friends say you need
Yeah,
that person, you need the empathy, you need the feeling, you need everything involved.
you do.
So I'm sure it will happen.
And
But
apps aren't perfect, as we learned, my husband and I, when we went to China and we tried to speak to people through an app, and they were like, "What are you what?
right.
Did you mean to say horse?" I don't think so. So, yeah, there is some errors that you experience in real time. So, people human touch is always better. It is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh,
Absolutely.
there are so many places I still wanna go with you right now. So, one of the things, okay, 2 things. The role of privilege, I wanna speak to that,
Okay.
and, um, y but first, before we get there, I wanna know, more about this comment that you made to me about, you interpret in a university class, and you said to me yesterday during our chat that you are not just there for the deaf person in the class.
Mm.
Can you elaborate on that? Because I think this was epically crucial to this conversation to create more community around what we're talking about.
Absolutely. So this is this. I love this. This is exciting to me. There's a whole new within the last say 10 years of a
Yeah.
way that interpreters and interpreter coordinators are trying to present what we do. For
Hmm.
example, I get hired to interpret a class at UVic, and part of my job is to send an email and introduce myself to the professor. I'm going to be in their classroom.
Yeah.
So I always say, "Hi, I'll be your interpreter
Yeah.
for the semester so
Yeah.
your classroom can be accessible." We're trying to get away from
Awesome.
this is I'm the interpreter for the deaf person because everybody
Yeah.
thinks, oh, that deaf person needs an interpreter. No, hearing people that don't know sign language need me
Yeah.
equally as that deaf individual.
Yeah.
So it's
That is
just a
huge.
little tweak in how you look at it. And it's like, wow,
Right.
it's so that really helped. Like it's amazing the difference that I've seen of when people go, right, as a hearing
Right.
person, I need you to connect to the student.
Right. And then for the other students to know that they can converse with the deaf student, and then that's accessible to them as well. They may not have thought, "Oh,
Absolutely.
I don't wanna bother the interpreter, and I don't know sign language, so I'm just gonna sneak out the door and that whim is gone." But the community aspect of that, I just fell in love with. I thought that was so cool to, again, it's your video relay service, connecting the dots between people and, just, I don't know, my Pollyanna, making the
Yeah.
world a brighter place.
Yay.
Like, I just love it. Awesome. So, privilege, you told me a really cool story. I mean, yes, we met yesterday. We're friends, but we met yesterday to just make sure there was no bugs in the system and we could hear each other and see each other. But we had an awesome conversation. And one of the stories you shared with me is interpreting a Black Lives Matter rally back during the heat of COVID, and just that process and what privilege means in that dialogue for being an interpreter at an event such as that. Can you share? Do you remember first what you said to me?
I
And
do.
then it's like,
I
okay, cool,
do.
good, 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 good.
Yeah.
Okay, go for it, girl.
Yeah. So that was so Black Lives Rally here in Victoria, and
Hmm.
amazing. The organizers were on it, and they wanted to make it accessible, so they wanted interpreters. And then, so I got asked to do it. Here's my
Hmm.
email coming to me. I have a
Hmm.
habit of using my hands here. I'll put my hands down as I
I
talk. I'm
love
giving you
it.
signs as
Use
we
it.
go.
I do
Um,
too.
Love it. So I get this request, every day, just as an interpreter, you get all these requests. Are you available this time, this date, this
Hmm.
event? And so I got this, and right away, it's you have to think about it. You have to be really introspective before you take jobs as well. Who's the best interpreter for the job? You have
Hmm.
to always think. Um, Me being a white person, I shouldn't really be the one. Initially, this is what I thought.
Hmm.
Me being a non-BIPOC person, I shouldn't be the face of this message. There was a disconnect. I'm thinking,
Yeah.
oh, because you need to have somebody that ideally understands what it's like to be
Hmm.
BIPOC and understands, if that person has experienced oppression and to
Hmm.
what Black lives the whole what it like what the message and everything to really interpret it with the fullest
Yes.
intent.
Yeah.
And so there's a dilemma. So I get this request, and I, as a white interpreter, think, okay, well, I sent a message back to the coordinator. I said, please let them know that I'm not, I'm a white interpreter. Are they
Hmm.
okay with that? So really
Hmm.
checking in my privilege, being upfront.
Hmm.
Yes, I'm a white interpreter. I've had this X amount of years experience. I
Hmm.
would love to be a part of this. Your
Hmm.
call. And
Hmm.
also, having said that, realizing in our community, as I've already said, we're limited with sign language interpreters on the
Yes.
island and
Yeah.
throughout BC, I think across Canada,
Yeah.
regardless, just in the island. And we don't have culturally diverse hearing sign language interpreters.
Okay.
So always, keeping that in check. So making
Mhm.
sure with the organizers of the event, luckily they got back and they said, we appreciate that your transparency and that
Mhm.
you thought of that. We need your skill set. It doesn't matter if you're white, BIPOC, whatever you are, we need your
Yeah.
skill set. And if you can
Yeah.
come as you are with an open mind and relay the message, that's who we want. And so it
Mm.
was such an amazing that
Wow.
that was definitely a vicarious euphoric moment, being able
Yeah.
to be a part of that and get that across to the deaf members that were at the rally. um, and then afterwards it was we had debriefed afterwards, and it was amazing to have the organizers come up and say, we so appreciate that you were upfront with us and that you
Yeah.
thought of that.
Yeah.
And so great, we're beyond that, let's move forward of how we can work together. I was like,
Oh,
oh, it was such a beautiful moment.
that's awesome. That's awesome that the open-mindedness is everywhere, right? You'll find it. And if
Right.
you're an open-minded
Yes.
person, you'll attract other open-minded people. That's what I believe anyway. So,
Yeah.
um and that's really cool because there is room for people like you to interpret events like that, just as there's room for hearing interpreters as opposed to only deaf interpreters, right? I'm starting to see that there's
Absolutely.
a gray area, if you will, and that it's okay to be part of that. And but yes, being mindful first to acknowledge your role in the as the culture ally. This is who I am. Does this work for your organization? I think that was brilliant. I just think next level 10. Way to go.
Oh,
And, um, so a lot of folks are going to watch this and go, teach us some sign language, right? Because this is what singers get. And this is, I imagine this is what you get when people find out I'm a singer. They're like, sing something now,
right.
dance,
Ah,
monkey dance,
yes,
go.
yes, exactly.
Especially at the holidays.
Yeah.
And you're just like, no thanks. I'm just having some wine." So
Yeah.
do you get that from folks that find out, "Hey, I'm a sign language interpreter," and, do they often ask you to show them stuff or teach them stuff? And if so, what is your response to that?
For that particular, I don't get asked a lot actually for
Oh,
teaching
okay.
signs or showing signs.
Oh, lucky you.
Yes, I am lucky in that regard. What I
Yeah,
do get a lot when so also so if that were the case, then I would say again that example of if it was a situation where there's a deaf person there that I've been interpreting for,
yeah,
if they're open to it, I don't want to. You never want to assume either that somebody's
yeah.
willing to teach you their language and their culture
Right,
just because you asked.
right.
But I wouldn't facilitate that interpretation, and for the deaf person to say, oh no, I'm busy or whatever.
Yeah,
But never take that on myself. Again,
cool.
not my language, not my culture.
Right.
One thing that I do have a lot of, well, anyway, that I've experienced a lot of is people, like maybe more like not in a work situation, in just a social situation, and people will actually go, "Oh, you're a sign language interpreter," and I'll be like, "Yeah," and they'll be like, "What did I just say?"
What?
Yeah, like they'll just go, like they'll just do gestures, and so
Like,
my
made up
yeah,
gestures.
made up gestures and thinking that they're funny, and so I'll go like, "Dude, you just told me to F off." Like, that was they're like, "Really?"
2
And I'm
thumbs
like,
up.
"No, you're like,
No, you said
what?
nothing.
You said nothing." Anyway,
Oh, I have
yeah.
never encountered that level of, I don't even know what to call that, but wow,
Oh,
good on
yeah.
you. Good on
Yeah, I get
you.
asked a lot too. This is a digression, but I get asked a lot too. Oh, so you're an American Sign Language interpreter, so you know Braille?
What?
Nope. Yeah, so often people think the two go hand in hand, and it's so
Huh,
disappointing that people could be
huh.
so
And so those moments are
unaware.
crucial for to, you know, how would we say this? Those moments are crucial to not let them sit in that ignorance, but also not shame them for their ignorance. What do you do? What is your philosophy on moments like that? Like humor was awesome. Like bringing in a little humor. What would you
Yeah,
suggest to people who are, in that spot of like, "Oh man, do I address this? Do I not? Do I just walk
right.
away?"
Right, right. Again, depends if it's on a in a
Yeah.
professional setting
Mm,
or a personal setting. If it's
fair.
a personal setting, I'm gonna file back, "Yeah, I don't know if I want." Just kidding. We're not gonna have any more chats. No. Um, there because there's also, like, just like how you said you don't know what you don't know, and I get that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's a different level
Yeah.
when you ask somebody that says they're an American Sign Language interpreter and assuming that I know Braille.
Yeah.
So I don't usually pursue that one, but the
No.
anybody else that's curious, oh, I'm happy to chat with whomever.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And nice segue because here we go. Connect with Tanya on Facebook at
There we
Tanya
go.
Creed. She's super warm and friendly, folks. So if you have any questions or if you just want to send her love for being an amazing guest on a podcast, like go for it. Send her some hearts. She liked it. She's a busy mama, but she'll acknowledge. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, for sure. Tanya, if you can believe it, we have 4 minutes.
Oh, no.
I don't even know. Maybe you're like, "Of course I can believe it. My ass is sweating." Like me.
It's not.
But but I want to leave the last little bit here before we sign off to you because I hit a lot of the points that we had in our conversation yesterday. And just knowing you, things you've talked about, I hit some of those points. But I wonder, is there anything that I've overlooked or missed or we need to circle back to that you can think of that you want to add to this conversation for folks that are just maybe just finding out about this role and it's totally not what they thought, but they're really intrigued? What can you, where should we go?
Absolutely. I think the final thought should be, taking an American Sign Language class is amazing. Even if you're not going to
Mm-hmm.
become an interpreter, just to broaden your
Mm-hmm.
understanding
Mm-hmm.
of American Sign Language plus deaf culture. Within when you learn from a deaf individual,
Mm-hmm.
you the language you also learn about the culture. It's ingrained or it's a part of the
Yeah.
curriculum.
Yeah.
So just I have two great resources
Oh,
that I
cool.
wouldn't mind
Thank you.
sharing.
Yes. Go for it. Yep.
One is if you do live in Victoria, because that's where we're
Yep.
coming to you from. There's the Island Deaf and Hard of Hearing Center, and they have in-person American Sign Language classes. And it's all about it, they're like 6 weeks, different levels, and it's all about conversational, just like you get to ask these type of questions to a deaf person with your
Wow.
deaf instructor. So you,
Cool.
um, it's neat too because you have somebody like me would come for the first class to kind of introduce everybody, have the interpreter, and then from there on in, no
Yeah.
interpreter, you're fully immersed in learning the language.
Awesome.
So again, that's the Island Deaf and Hard of Hearing Center, fabulous deaf instructors.
Super. I'll put a link in the show notes after we were not live. So.
Perfect. And then if you're not in Victoria, there's a great online resource of taking American Sign Language classes online. I believe it's out of Vancouver. A few of
Hmm.
my deaf friends are teachers on this platform,
Oh,
and it's
awesome.
called Queer ASL. And it's
Cool.
queer as in everybody, allies, anybody, however you identify, everyone's welcome.
Awesome.
And yeah, they have amazing deaf instructors as well.
I'm
So
gonna get
always
that
have a
link
deaf
too.
instructor.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what I'm getting from your community, and by that I mean the interpreter community, is that folks that are I'm really interested in learning sign language. I don't want to interpret, but I would like to talk with my
Yeah,
hands to people.
huge.
It's okay to make mistakes, right? Like it's okay. You
Yes,
don't have to be perfect and learn 6 years of study before you even go up to someone and try to communicate. People want to talk to each other and it's okay to sign something and if someone knows that you're learning, they're not going to hold a grudge against you for the rest of time. They're going to understand that you're learning and from what I understand when learners or beginners share their voices, it's met with a lot of heart. It really is.
absolutely.
Like, yeah, awesome. I love that.
Yeah,
Well, thank you, darling. And like I said again, you can find Tanya on Facebook at Tanya Creed, and she's fabulous as always. Oh, we have one little chat here. Let's make sure if I missed it. No. Oh, my producer has already put the link in the chat to one of the things we said. Way to go, producer! On it. Professional.
very
Only
professional.
professional all the time. Well, Tanya, I thank you, and I'm going to say bye to you, and thank you, and love you, and You're welcome back anytime. So, anytime we need to expand on this conversation, you have an open invitation. So,
Ooh, yay.
thank you, darling. And I'm going to do the official sign off. So, bye bye, love.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Isn't she awesome? Like, I love bringing my friends on here because why not? When you're friends with awesome people, you might as well have their voices shared. So, thank you so much for everybody that watched. Thank you for your questions and your chat and your comments. I appreciate that. And we are the Voxsana Vodcast talking about all things voice, speaking, singing, writing. And I guess I'm going to have to add the ASL in there too, because why not? This is. Voice comes in all shapes and colors, and it's brilliant. Expression is expression. So follow us. You can follow us and our show schedule online at our new website, voxsana.co or .co. I have yet to make a commitment on how I say that. But nonetheless, there it is. There we are. And that'll be in the show notes as well. And on Facebook for now at voxsana.co or .co. Eventually, I will have a podcast that is coming to you in a few months' time. And until then, everybody, we have a show. I should tell you about it next Tuesday, October 4th. Frank McGuire is a radio host and all around genuinely amazing person. He's going to give us the inside scoop on what it means to be a radio host and what that work looks like with your voice, and also the art of conversation. So stay tuned. That is next Tuesday at 5 p.m. PST, so 7 p.m. Central and 8 p.m. EST. And if I've made a mistake, you can check our website and make sure you got the right time. So until then, everybody, thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time.